Well, thanks everybody for being here. This is a great turnout, and as a participant in what was then called Neighborhood College, now it's called City College, I feel an affinity for all the neighbors here. But this is a proclamation for Neighborhoods First month, February of 2014. And whereas the purpose of Neighborhoods First is to involve citizens in the local government process as it affects the quality of life in their neighborhood by joining in partnership with the city to address neighborhood needs and strengths. And whereas Neighborhoods First provides an effective mechanism whereby the citizens of Hagerstown, sharing common neighborhood identity, goals, and concerns, may form groups that are officially recognized by the city and given their responsibility to identify, plan for, and implement improvements to their neighborhood. And whereas February is the 17th anniversary of the organization of Neighborhoods First program, and whereas the citizens in neighborhoods throughout the city have formed Neighborhood First groups, now therefore be it resolved that with the support of the City Council, I, David Geisberts, the Mayor of the City of Hagerstown, do hereby proclaim and recognize February 2014 to be Neighborhoods First month. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Thanks, Judy. Thank you. John, thanks. Thank you so much. Sarah, thanks for your penny. Thank you. I'm going to give this to you, sir.
Mayor, can we take a photo of
Sure. Absolutely.
Do we want the rest of council to join as well?
Yeah, and we don't have Martin here.
Tell us where to stand.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, right here. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Another one with this. 1, 2, 3. One more with the good one.
Good stuff. All right.
All right, now 3 again. 1, 2, 3. Perfect.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Keep up the good work.
Thank you all. It's good to see you.
Next item up on the agenda is the Planning and Code Administration Division's 2013 Building and Neighborhood Protection and Enhancement Report. Our distinguished Director of Planning will walk us through this.
Good afternoon. Every year we do a recap of the activity that's occurred in Planning and Code Administration in the prior year. As you know, Planning and Code Administration is a division of the Department of Community and Economic Development, and it's our internal mission to enhance the image, quality of life, and economy in the city. And all of the enterprises in our department work together as a team to achieve that goal. So just to give you an idea of what's happening with our division includes planning and zoning, which I'm sure you're aware, plan review, permitting, and inspections. We work with the city's codes and policies to guide development activity in the city and protect the quality of life in our neighborhoods. This report provides information, in addition to the long-range planning and annexation, of course. This report provides information on our activities related to the plan review activities, building construction, rental licensing, inspections, and code compliance activities for 2013. Oh, I should probably use this, shouldn't I? Oh, here we go. Skip over that part. Okay. Site plan activity. This is the work of the Planning Commission and staff. In 2013, we approved site plans for 31,881 square feet of commercial and institutional development and 272 multifamily units. The total estimated construction value was $43.23 million. And we also, at the tail end of the year, approved concept plans for quite a bit of commercial development on Broad Fording Road on that land that was annexed in 2007 to the north of the Best Buy shopping center. So that's about 110,000 square feet. We expect we'll be seeing site plans in soon for the north part of that development, which would be developed by the Fultons. In terms of building and trade permits and inspections, there were 497 building permits issued with a total estimated construction value of $28.2 million. We had 1,900 trade permits issued, 6,700 inspections for building and trades permits. Every category was up from the amounts of 2012. And complex multi-year projects for our inspection teams included the Washington County Free Library and Bester Elementary School. The library, of course, is opened up. At Bester, still under construction. In terms of commercial activity, and also attached to your memo were various charts with more data if you wanted to really drill down. This is just to give you a recap and a summary. There were continue to be many retail and restaurant fit-outs throughout the city in 2013. Papa Murphy's in El Ranchero on Dual Highway, Second and Charles, and a Charles Schwab outlet on Garland Grove, a new building for Mattress Warehouse on Eastern Boulevard at the center in Antietam. Bob Evans did some interior stuff on Railway Lane, Little Caesars on North Burhans, and then there was some new construction of support facilities at Younger Toyota and Hamilton Nissan. And then the office parks over at the Light Business Park, we saw fit out of the second floor of that very large Capital Women's Health building, including office space for Northwestern Mutual and a Studio 6 on Connemara Drive, which is actually the MKS Business Park. In terms of residential construction activity, we issued 78 permits for 143 new units. 143 of those units were 3 buildings at the Reserve at Collegiate Acres, which is why that number is so much higher. And they all were for 5 active projects in land that was annexed within the last 15 years. Collegiate Acres, which is the Beezer project on the west side of Terps Boulevard on the northwest side of town. The Reserve at Collegiate Acres, which is a new multifamily portion of that development out there. Cortland Villas, which is north of town. Dave Lyles is developing those semi-attached single-family homes or duplexes. Greenwich Park, also semi-detached duplex type homes by West Churchy and Potomac Manor, which is home construction. The last phase is developing in the city on the north side of town. And then in 2013, as a drive around to see how things were going, I observed that 45 new homes were completed in 2013 in these projects. And at the end of the year, construction was underway for 97 units, 68 of which were for the Reserve at Collegiate Acres. In terms of downtown construction activity, we saw some PEP activity, which is the city's Partners in Economic Progress incentive program, where we partner with private developers to encourage investment downtown. Renovations continued on 2 properties with the Wareham Building, which is 138 West Washington Street, that's Rafi Ansari's project, and Mulberry Lofts on 22 North Mulberry, that's John Laughlin's project in the old Action Products Factory. Renovations were completed on 1 PEP project, which was the Dave Lyles renovation of 140 South Potomac Street for Shelby McGinley's office and the Draper and McGinley office. And then renovations continued at the city's project at 36 to 40 North Potomac Street with on the artist lofts on the upper floors. This year, of course, you're going to see some activity on the gallery space. Last year, demolition of the old motel wing at the back of the Midtown Motel at 170 West Washington Street. That's the project where the city is preparing the property for resale. And then in terms of neighborhood protection and enhancement, we registered 8,752 dwelling units and 3,134 properties last year, which is the highest number in 10 years. The property inspector, maintenance inspectors, and licensing inspectors handled a large number of complaints and licensing inspections, which resulted in notations of 2,224 safety violations, and a safety violation would be things such as smoke alarms, wiring, handrail sprinklers, 3,495 neighborhood vitality violations, which is weeds, trash, debris, junk vehicles, 588 quality of life violations. That's more minor things on the interior, like damaged surfaces and elements, missing screens, things like that. And then 1,668 preventative maintenance violations, which would be mortar, gutters, rotting wood, painting, that kind of thing. With all of those notations, we pursued 547 abatement cases. The zoning is, yeah,
The last slide, I'm assuming that is specifically, that those notices were specifically for rental units only.
that would be all of their activity.
That's all units.
But it could be that a single property would see multiples of those violations.
Maybe I didn't ask right. That's all units throughout the city, regardless of whether they are rental or owner
Right,
occupied?
right.
Okay, all right,
The entire work of the property maintenance inspectors and licensing inspectors.
okay. Do you guys have that broken down in any way?
It probably could be achieved with the miracle of munis.
Possibly, that could work.
If you would like to see that, we could attempt to do that.
Yeah, I'm just curious, because obviously the feedback we got through our recent discussion on the crime-free ordinances, you know, we don't take any action against owner-occupied properties in the city. So it would be interesting to see, you know, just how level that approach is.
Right, okay.
It's important to remind people watching at home or in the audience that if you see a violation in your neighborhood and you call the code enforcement office, they will go and inspect. They're not going to care if it's owner occupied
Right.
or renter occupied.
Or you could notify us online.
Good point. Go to the website.
And then in terms of zoning, which is also a neighborhood protection and enhancement type of activity, the zoning administrator responded to numerous complaints of zoning violations last year. The most common issues, which people are always curious, what's the most common thing we respond to, is home businesses operating in excess of what's permitted by the zoning ordinance. You can do a home business, but only if no one can tell you're doing it. And so that means you're not getting a lot of deliveries, you're not getting customers, you don't have staff, you don't have that kind of thing, no signs. And so we respond to complaints about that. Keeping of livestock, we chase a lot of chickens out of town. Running of illegal auto repair businesses, that's something that crops up on the alleys and it aggravates the adjoining neighbors. Keeping of untagged vehicles and work without approvals in the historic districts. And then legislative updates to create better tools so that we can achieve the vision of improving the image, economy, and quality of life of the city. We updated, the update to the noise ordinance was introduced last year. It was adopted just this last month. We updated the codes dealing with portable storage containers and dumpsters. We had been getting complaints about both, and so we updated the codes to create a better tool for that. And then updates for smoke detectors in the building code because of needing to be compliant with new state regs. And those smoke detector regs, it breaks down by when the house was built in terms of whether you have to have a certain type of battery or if they have to be hardwired or if they have to be interconnected. And for some reason, there's some magic years that occurred that's when certain things have to be achieved. And then also, we updated the land management code. There was a lot of minor cleanups relating to the large overhaul we did in 2012, in addition to some new provisions that affected on-premise signs in all the zoning districts. Used to be we didn't have very many sign regulations, perhaps any sign regulations in the commercial general district. Now we do. So now all the zoning districts have sign regulations. We created new regs for temporary outdoor sales facilities. As you can recall, it was the most talked about part of this. The small auto sales facilities regs were changed. We're allowing a small amount of retail as a special exception in the industrial restricted zoning district. We now allow, it wasn't clear in the zoning ordinance, but now home workstations are permitted in any legal dwelling unit in the city. So because we have dwelling units that are legal in other places besides the more obvious zoning districts. And then also some regs to deal with inoperable vehicles. I think that might be about it. Yes, this just refers to the fact that there's all those charts with the data attached to the memo that was in the packet. So that was all that I had.
When does the comprehensive plan have to be updated again?
It's every 10 years now.
Oh, it's 10 years.
And
'cause
we're working on an
It used to be
internal.
6, but it
yeah.
took 2 years to get it
Yeah.
done.
It started last year.
We're working on an internally created update this time. As best we can, given how complex plans are now per state law.
So it's starting to get underway now in terms
Yes.
of the next comprehensive plan?
Yeah, speaking of that, I guess I've been made aware, given the impression that as part of that update and the Smart growth is always changing its terminology depending on which governor you're under at the time. You know, I guess with Glendenning it was smart growth, and with Ehrlich it was priority places, and now with O'Malley it's sustainable communities. Is it true that the sustainable communities provision now does not acknowledge that the entire city is a PFA?
The PFA thing is separate, and it's true, right now, the entirety of the city is not a PFA because we have one agricultural transition district, which makes it ineligible to be a PFA.
Okay.
When we annexed the Cromine property in the east side of town, they requested agricultural zoning, it still has it.
Okay.
I debated that with the state quite extensively, and I did not prevail.
Yeah, I was going to say the 97 law was pretty clear.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for confirming.
Mhm.
Well, I appreciate the update, and I want to thank, I know there's some staff in the
Yes.
audience here. Paul Folk is our inspections manager, and Gary Lambert is our program manager, so I want to thank them for their work. I know,
Alex Rohrbar from planning.
yes, Alex Rohrbaugh, planner, John Kearns, community development, all of these people play a vital role in enhancing our neighborhoods and communities, so appreciate all your efforts.
And our
Real quick,
chief,
any trends, Kathy, for 2014 you want to mention for the mayor and council?
no, it just seems like the residential at those 5 projects are still perking along. Beazer seems to be at breakneck pace to try to finish that project out. The Dynacor started in on the phase 1 of the reserve, which is a certain number of multifamily units on the east side of Terps Boulevard, and then 2015 would be the soonest that they could start on the last 2 tracks up there per their APFO agreement. We expect to see some commercial activity, as I said earlier, in that area north of Best Buy. And hopefully we'll see some more activity in the office parks out there in the Eastern Boulevard quarter. So there's still quite a number of lots available there.
Any questions or
Yeah, just a
feedback?
comment. I just wanted to compliment you and your department and all those others who put this together. This is a very comprehensive piece of work, and it's clear, I think, that there's a lot of work going on by the employees of the city of Hagerstown to improve the quality of life within the city of Hagerstown. And when you read it in this form, it's pretty clear that there's some good differences being made.
Thank you.
And I
We
forgot to
appreciate
mention zoning administrator Steve Bachmiller. I didn't mention him before, but
Oh, yes, sorry.
he does great work and also does a lot on his own to promote especially the history of Hagerstown. So a lot of dedicated staff here at the city.
Yeah, Blaine Mowen had a conflict, or he would have been here. He's our chief code official, plan reviewer.
This is an important report for us because it gets not only to the point of quality of life for our residents, but also building the tax base for the city, the vitality of the city. A lot of that's reflected in this report. So the data in the report's important.
All
All right, well, thank you so much.
Let me just raise one of the
Please.
other issues. Kathy, you just happened to be sitting there, so thank you. Some of us, Penny and the mayor and I, were up at a reception at Oak Hill. I don't know if you made it or not. But the building, one of the buildings on the way up there, it was 206 and 208, failed to do anything about their sidewalks, and it was pure ice.
106 and 108.
With what's probably going to happen tonight, somebody's likely to fall on it. It was slippery. If you could encourage the owner to clean that sidewalk, it would be much safer on that hill.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
106, 108, Gary. 106, 108.
Yeah, that's what it
Oh,
was.
yeah.
106.
106.
Yeah, yeah.
The next item up is Hagerstown Suns. We have the fireworks schedule and the lease
Okay,
extension all kind of lumped together.
Okay.
But we'll do the, I guess, the easy one first, the
Okay.
fireworks.
All right.
I hope that's easy.
That's an early show, is my understanding.
Yeah.
It's an earlier game,
Yeah.
is that right?
First of all, you can introduce him to the council.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great.
With me today, obviously, is Tony DeBoer, part of the ownership team. This is Chris Easom, who's the new general manager. We welcome him to Hagerstown.
Welcome.
And you may know Robert Brucci. Thanks for coming in, Chris. On the fireworks, in your packet, there is a proposal that was the same one that was in last month, but there was a question regarding specifically the Monday, May 5th show, which I think is a Cinco de Mayo event that you want to have. The lease says that fireworks shows are limited and they're not supposed to be held on Sunday night through Thursday night, but that's an issue that really this body can decide if you want to allow that for this one event. Doesn't mean in the future there'll be other events that you allow, but basically I think we're coming in tonight to see if you want to allow that event on that Cinco de Mayo event, and then ultimately I need you to approve all the shows.
I'm the one that raised the issue. So my understanding is this is going to be an early game with an early fireworks show. Is that right?
6:30 game.
And so what time would you anticipate the fireworks show?
As long as we don't have any rain delays and the game's a normal game, I would imagine we'd shoot them off sometime between 9 and 9:30.
I was going to say without extra innings too.
Yeah.
You get a tie, you could go in there.
I think I read somewhere where that said that they would be probably discharged before 9:30. I think 9:30 is the time that's stuck out in my
That certainly doesn't give me a concern. 10:30, 11 o'clock would give me a concern.
So I mean, if you're considering a waiver to that provision of the lease, then maybe you include in that, you know, even if it's the middle of the 7th inning, you discharge them at 9:30 just to. I know you can't load them up and then just pack them up if it's too late, so you have to discharge them.
Oh, that takes everybody out of the play of the game. You can't do that. It's like saying, hey, guys, got to stop and wait for the fireworks. That wouldn't be fair to the players.
It's been done before.
We set them up in the outfield too, so I don't think we wouldn't be able to stop the game like that to light them off. I don't think our coaches would be too happy.
If you're losing, though.
Good tactic.
What's the consensus?
9:30 is fine.
You're okay with an earlier start? You're okay with the Monday? Penny?
You know, I don't know. And the reason that I don't know is because I had to fight this issue before with the people who lived over there that were very upset with the respect to the fireworks. So.
Was it that they were lit off too late in
No,
one
it was
particular
because
instance?
it was the whole timing bit. And it's been too long back that I don't remember, but there was issues. And I don't think that there's been issues since then.
No, it really hasn't. I think back in those days there was a lot of consecutive events too.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there was a
Right.
lot. There was a lot.
Right.
So, yeah, that's the thing.
Chris,
You know, obviously, if for some reason we went well into the night, I think we would use our best judgment and probably not shoot them off, and
Well,
whether
that would
it's
be it. I mean, you're dealing with the kids that
that's
are
the
going
issue.
to school,
Yeah.
and that was
That's-
the issue
And
in all of this.
that's the issue I think we all have. I wouldn't like to find out that this game goes into 15, 20 innings, and at 11:30 you guys are setting off fireworks on a school night. That's my only concern. Otherwise, I don't have any.
Chris, you okay with?
Move that up to 6:05.
You're okay with Monday?
Yeah, it doesn't bother me.
Looks like we have a consensus to approve a waiver to that provision of the lease then and do the Cinco de Mayo fireworks.
Okay.
All right.
So we'll just put the list on the voting session, but I think they're going to go ahead with if that's okay.
Plans, sure.
Very good.
All right, and the next item is the lease extension.
Right. And Tony's here to join me on this discussion. A couple weeks ago, we received a request from the Suns for the consideration of the 2015 and 16 seasons. And just to remind everybody, they're leased up basically for this upcoming season. So that's not an issue. It's 2015 and 16. The Suns have offered us some more favorable terms that I've put here in the memo about some things that they're willing to work with us on. It seems like the issue of termination is probably what's on everyone's mind on both sides. The current lease has a First and a Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment is written in there that, I'll just read it. The Second Amendment says that Either party may terminate the tenancy upon a 90-day written notice to the other party. That's the way the lease is currently written. So I guess the issue maybe needs to be hashed out is what's an acceptable termination on both sides. And
Do you
I
know
think Tony has some
what the
comments.
original reason why 90-day?
The Suns requested that.
So that's what's,
Sorry, Bill, what did you say?
The Suns requested that clause.
They did,
That's why it was put in there.
And I'm not sure what the latest memo says, but good afternoon, everyone.
Hi,
first of
Tony.
all. But the Suns are prepared to pay the $50,000 up front and make it non-refundable, whether the ballpark is used for 2 seasons, 1 season, or not at all. But minor league baseball requires us to have a sure place to play. And because of the uncertainty of building the new facility, we've been asked to provide a Plan B. I can't speculate about the odds of the Suns being here or elsewhere in the 2015 or 2016 season, but for me as a baseball fan, it would be a windfall. And also, I believe for the city, it would be a windfall for having the economic impact and the benefit of having professional baseball in town for 1 or 2 more years. In lieu of a termination, an either party termination clause, what I would like to propose is that we have a mutual termination clause so that if the Suns are safely in another location, we can release the facility and we would not unreasonably withhold such a release so that it would be freed up for other purposes. Under the rules of minor league baseball, it's one association. And so the Hagerstown Suns are the so-called owners of the franchise in Hagerstown. So no other affiliated minor league team can come in until we relinquish our franchise. So that's the situation. And I believe that the General Counsel for Minor League Baseball sent you a letter to that effect.
By email this morning or this afternoon, I forwarded it to everybody. I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't really have a chance to read it, but I
And that pretty much lays out
Right.
what I just said.
The idea being that it's not like we would be able to find a team that could move in the 2016 season and let's say the stadium in Fredericksburg's not done and kind of kick you guys out before it's time, because if they're an affiliated team that's moving in, they wouldn't be allowed to do that anyway.
Right.
That's the crux of the argument.
Yeah.
Any question? Go
Mayor,
ahead.
I have, personally, I have a couple thoughts. One, I have absolutely no problem with renegotiating the lease to provide the clause that's being requested. I mean, as far as that goes. Two, I don't think this is the venue to do that. I think we should have an executive session. We should at least have our attorney here at the very minimum so that we have legal advice on what we're doing. I think I understand this, but I would also want to make sure, I'll just do a little bit of the things that I would want to make sure, and the reason I say this, I want to make sure if we do this, that we basically enter no more liability to the stadium. I don't want to find out that we enter into this and that we end up, for whatever reason, spending a substantial amount of money in maintenance or other things. And I think that the Sun's proposal is such that an initial reading, that seems to be what it is, but this is an amendment to a current lease, and I don't even have the current lease in front of me. And I'm not saying that we should tonight, because I don't think this is, again, the proper time to make this decision. I think next meeting we should have an executive session to discuss that. But I do want to say on the record, so there's no misunderstanding, as it relates to me, I have no problem giving that clause. I just want to make sure that we have the appropriate negotiations for it. Obviously, we're giving the Sun something of substance. They're proposing that they give us something in substance in exchange for that, and I need to make sure from our end. Certainly, the Suns didn't sit down around the round table with the TV on and decide together what they should put on the table to us, and I think the same should be when we make a response.
What kind of liabilities are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about just by way of example, another light pole goes down, and we're told that we have to maintain the stadium, maintain the repair of the stadium. That's the type of thing I'm thinking of, something relatively catastrophic or non-catastrophic that causes us to incur, and I know that this proposal indicates that the city would not be obligated for any more capital expenditures. And that may be fine. That may be the answer I'm looking at, but I sure would like my attorney
to look at the
review it
original
and say,
lease,
yeah,
too.
under this term, you guys can't have that liability. That's what I want to make sure of. I think the relationship we've had in the past has been very fine, but I think somewhere along 30 years ago, somebody made a decision to lease a stadium for $1, and I'm not sure whether that was in the best or the worst, but that's my bottom line. Again, I don't
Sure.
mind giving that clause up, but I want to make sure that we're protected.
Well, we wouldn't be voting on this until the end of the month anyway, so we have some time to have that discussion.
I think that makes sense to define the liability in more detail.
Especially if it's not, or if it's substantially different than what's in the current lease. Like you said, this is an extension of the current lease, which we don't necessarily have in front. I'm sure that those kinds of things are spelled out in the original.
They are, and I just, we need to look at it, that's all.
Any other thoughts, questions, feedback?
Well, I think first I'm opposed to an executive session. We have the sons who have made a proposal. It's right here in black and white for the public to read. Clearly we have opinions that various members are going to express here in open session on their response. Still, we also have a public document where staff recommends against removal of the clause. So the only people that don't know what we decide are the public, and we're going to end up coming out to some executive session and telling the public anyway. I understand Lou's point about deferring to the attorney on some of the legalese within the proposed changes, but for me it's fairly simple. I don't see any practical reason why we would remove the 90-day clause.
If I may, I believe that was perhaps that recommendation was made on the basis of incomplete information about.
It says here in the third paragraph, we don't recommend we accept that.
Which memo are you looking at? Because I see him.
What I'm looking at?
Yeah, that's one.
Is that the February 4 memo?
February 4?
Okay.
In the initial contact that Mr. Quinn made with me, he indicated that the city's option to get out of the agreement would be taken away. And I said, that's not going to work. So that's why I put it in the memo.
That's what I'm referring to.
What I referred back to then was the way the current lease is written. It's a 90-day termination that either side can do. And I believe Mr. DeBurr is saying that we can do it mutually, have a mutual understanding of that should be added to that clause.
But the way it works now is we have the ability to terminate within 90 days. I fail to see the practical reason why we would remove that ability from a facility that we own and rent to someone. I don't
valuable
see the logic,
consideration
to that. Well, value, sure, we can look at that as well. I mean, again, staff gave us the numbers last week, I believe, in an email. The difference was, I think it was like, 36,000 that came in amusement tax. I think our expense was, well above 100,000. No one has shown me in these valuable considerations that we break even.
No, I'm talking about us not spending money, Kristen. That's my point. Is that
but even the ones that are offered here don't get us to that point.
Well, and that's why I'm saying that we need to have a discussion about this, and that's why when I say executive session, it's I can easily look at and agree with you on everything you're saying. What essentially we're being asked to do is consider a new lease. I mean, that's what it is.
And for me, I'm not interested in the renter buying out a clause that, for all practical purposes, makes sense for a city to have over a facility that it owns.
I guess I come back to what's the practical purpose of the 90-day clause, because it's not like we're going to kick them out with nothing to replace them. I mean, it's an asset we have. We own it. We're either going to maintain it with no occupant or nobody
There is
leasing
a
it from
reason
us.
for the 90-day clause. The reason for the 90-day clause is because you have one council member right here who doesn't want to find that with this team leaving our town, that we end up having an extensive expense at Municipal Stadium. And I think we can avoid that. I'm not disputing what Kristen said. If I were to be told that by extending this lease, we would have to pay $60,000 every year that the Suns were playing, I would say, I'm not really interested in that. I would absolutely say that, and that's where I completely agree with Kristen. But I understand what's going on here. Everybody's got a problem. And so the way you solve it is you come up with an agreement, and hopefully we can do that. And that's why I need a lot more information. If we want to discuss it publicly, I don't think that's the smartest thing to do, and I think there'll be 3 votes to go in the executive session. But those are the things I think we need to discuss is what is it that we want to get in exchange, being reasonable. I mean, and what I'm looking for is protecting city taxpayers. I'm not trying to make a lot of money from the Suns. I'm trying to make sure that, there were a fair amount of people, and I think you can understand this, who, when this all went down, said to us, kick them out. If they're leaving, let them leave right now. And my answer to that I'm not going to cut off my nose to spite my face. I don't sit here and say for years that the Suns are a valuable asset and then say we don't want them here now. We have a stadium. If it doesn't get used, it's going to sit and it's going to be a problem for us. If it does get used and maintained without us expending money on it, it's an asset. I invite anybody in the world, and there's also, discussions we can have. I hear what Mr. DeBurr is saying, and I've heard from Mr. Quinn about how they own allegedly certain rights here. Well, maybe part of what we should ask for in a lease negotiation is an agreement when the Suns leave, they will not withhold our ability to get another minor league team. They won't stand in the way of doing that if they're the ones who have the power and control. These are the things that we need to discuss, not how much money we can get out of them, but how we make sure we protect ourselves from incurring liabilities. That's all. And I think that's fair. I think the Suns would understand that, and that's my interest.
And we're not trying to drive a hard bargain
I
either.
understand
You can
that.
see we're putting money right.
I fully understand that.
Mr. Munson.
Mayor, I agree with you. However, I think Mr. Metzner offers a process by which we can move forward on this matter. And I think it's important for us to move forward on a matter where we indeed do not cut off our nose to spite our face. What we do now may determine what our opportunities are going to be in the future to get another baseball team.
All right, so we'll schedule it for we have an executive session planned for next week. There's already a few items on there, so we'll try to plan accordingly. We may end up looking at another executive session maybe on the 25th, but we'll play it by ear depending on how expeditiously we get
Is
through
your
those
timing
meetings.
critical for February approval? Do you know about the timing
No, but I would hope that
Yeah,
we would
do
be
as soon
able
as
to
we can.
finish by then.
Okay. All right.
Just, Tony,
Please.
have they broken ground down there yet? Are they in?
I don't know for sure.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
I don't know.
How long, do you know how long it's anticipated that it's going to take to build a stadium?
I don't.
Okay.
I continue to be focused on Hagerstown. not
Okay,
other
good,
places.
good for you. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, can I say something while I'm sitting here? I just
Sure.
got a call from Waste Management, and with the storm coming tonight, they're not going to do any operations tomorrow morning because of the call
impending
for ice.
storm.
We're already behind this week because of the snow on Monday morning, but the message I want to put out to the public is set your trash out, set your recycling out, and
Just wait for it
By the
to
end of the
be
week,
delivered.
we'll have it collected. It may be a day late, it may be 2 days late.
So go ahead and set it out on the regular night.
Right, and we'll get it
And it'll
as soon as the
eventually be
weather allows
collected.
us to get around and get caught back up. But
Appreciate
they're
it.
not going to pick anything up tomorrow morning, that much we know.
Okay.
So I apologize for that problem, but it's just really for
Okay.
the safety of the workers.
Safety is
and the
important.
Yeah, and can I also say too, if code happens to be riding around, which I don't see that happening, but me, for instance, my trash is in the alleyway. The alleyway is hazardous. I had to move it down. There's no way. So you probably will see other ones that would have to put out on Wednesday for Thursday. So just tell code, okay? They have a legitimate as far as putting it out early.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because it is very hazardous, if, you
Yeah.
know, with us that have alleyways that are nothing but ice still.
Right. I don't
Yeah.
think we'll be tagging anything that's out too early this time because it's really our
Yeah.
fault for not picking it up.
So
because of
Ryan,
the
just to
weather.
be clear, what you're saying, no collection tomorrow morning, you're saying no collection on Wednesday, period.
No collection on Wednesday, period.
They're not going to come back out in the afternoon.
Correct.
So,
But then they're going to work Thursday morning, Friday morning, and Saturday
Right.
morning.
To
And so at
catch
the end
up.
of the day, Saturday, we should have the whole city collected again.
Right.
When's that next storm coming in? When is that?
They're calling
Say
for it Saturday and Sunday. My wife is in a
They
tizzy
may
because
wanna
of Potter's
start
Ball.
Wednesday evening anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that message.
Yeah,
It's
thank you.
important. Okay, housing and neighborhood improvement legislation. Another bite at this apple.
Gentlemen.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Good
members
evening,
of
gentlemen.
council. We're back this evening to kind of walk through the memos that we put in the packet. And I'd like to start by answering the question about code administration and how that is in the discussion, and then show you some examples of what we're talking about, just to make sure everyone's on the same page in terms of what staff has proposed. In terms of how staff view the code administration issues, the police department and our code administration division work hand in hand, or I should say hand in glove. And the chief involves our inspection folks in various meetings and efforts, because we have found that properties that have crime and a criminal element also have code deficiencies at the properties. And so there's a connection there. And in our research, we've read about those types of connections as well. It's not just what we have experienced locally. In terms of how we got here, some of the first conversations that we had with this administration, we had heard that it's important for code administration to work to help the neighborhoods. And thus, the chief and I have had conversations, more conversations than we had in the past, but we've had a lot in the past, about how code administration and the police can cooperate and work together to support our neighborhoods. And then this administration outlined a very clear direction for us in the vision for housing and neighborhoods. From a staff perspective, some of the conditions that we see in the neighborhoods are chronic nuisances. And I'm going to show some photos up on the screen in a moment. It's important to understand the process that code administration has to go through. The way our codes are established, a condition exists, we have to tell someone the condition exists, give them a period of time to correct the condition, and if they correct it, there's no harm to the property owner. But there is harm to the neighborhood, because for X number of days, they experienced these types of conditions. And what we are proposing is conditions that would be violations of our sanitation ordinance, violations of our weed ordinance, violations of our nuisance abatement ordinance, which deals with weeds and trash, and violations of our rubbish and garbage ordinance, which also deals with weeds and trash. We could actually remove the rubbish and garbage ordinance from this and still cover it just with sanitation to make things more narrow. But I'd like to put some pictures up just so everyone knows what it is that staff's talking about. The pictures that I'm going to show are, this particular one's at a rental property, but it's important to note that the pictures overall represent rental properties, owner-occupied properties, as well as vacant properties. And this is not on. I apologize for that. But the pictures reflect conditions at rental properties, owner-occupied properties, as well as vacant properties. When you look at conditions like this, it's kind of like you're able to tell how long something's been there by how faded and water damaged the trash is. It's kind of like if someone spills a drink that has ice in it and the ice cubes are still there, it's something recent. Something like this, before our inspectors got there, that condition likely had been there for a number of weeks. The same is true when we look at overgrown properties. This particular one was a rental and was occupied at the time. This one, I think, shows something that's important here. The overgrown property in the center, in this area, that's owner-occupied. Next door is a rental. Also, overgrown and maintained. I'm not sure if that particular one is rental or owner-occupied. But the point in showing these are the conditions that we receive calls about and emails about in the neighborhoods. And from the time the inspectors get there and issue a notice to the time that either the responsible party or our own contractors get there is at least 14 days. Even if we give 7 days for someone to get rid of the condition, by the time our contractors get there, generally you're looking at another week, just in terms of process. There's a few exceptions to that, and that's for set-outs, and I'm not including anything in set-outs in what we're talking about here today. But these are the types of conditions that we are hearing from the neighbors that they don't want to look at, and these are the conditions that we're suggesting should qualify as a chronic nuisance, whereby we would be able to collect a fee on the fourth time that there's a violation in a 12-month period. The first time we go through the process, if they take care of it, there's no penalty. The second time, no penalty. The third time, no penalty. The fourth time, there'd be a $100 fee. The fifth time, a $250 fee. The sixth time, a $500 fee.
Would you say that you get phone calls for the same properties for code violations?
The conditions that, and I shared some statistics, I believe a few weeks ago, that fall in line with what Kathy Marr was talking about earlier tonight. We, for the weeds, trash, debris, just weeds, trash, debris, and sanitation, there were 1,180 calls in calendar year 2013. Now, Kathy had up on there about 3,400 calls, but that includes other things than weeds, trash, and debris, but still neighborhood vitality. But if we narrow it down to violations that any property owner should just be, as a matter of ownership, take care of their property, it's at 1,180 notices were issued. Of those, 400, and I have the numbers in my folder, but approximately 400 had a second occurrence. And then approximately 115 had a third occurrence. And then 53 would fall into that fourth or more occurrence, where they've had at least those 4 that city staff responded to. That doesn't mean that there weren't other occasions. It's a dynamic where oftentimes conditions like this exist, and because of a sense of apathy or whatever the case may be, we may not learn about it. And it may exist for a period of time, then be abated before we even get by to check on it. And that comes down to staffing levels. We have approximately 14,000 properties in the city, and we have 3 inspectors full-time and 2 part-timers that are dedicated to this type of work.
John, you don't have any idea how many of those multi-repeat offenders are bank-owned foreclosure properties, do you?
It's probably in about the 40% range.
Because that,
And that's something that and probably a third of the pictures I showed tonight are the vacant properties, a third are owner occupied, and a third are rental occupied.
right, because that's my experience too. And I just, you know, I don't know what the solution is to that. I'd like to find one. But as far as neighborhood problems, I personally think the biggest problem we have right now are bank-owned foreclosed properties. I'm not saying I'm just saying that's something we need to address desperately.
Yes, and we've been experiencing some progress there ever since the state established a database keeping track of the foreclosed properties. I won't say a majority of the banks, but quite a few of the banks have now hired companies to go out and keep the grass cut and keep the trash picked up. And that keeps us from having to do that. I believe that the number Kathy had up on the screen, 500 and some abatements that we carried out last year, the majority of which weeds, trash, debris. And so these are the types of conditions, and when we looked at Chapter 95, which is currently titled Excessive Use of Police Services, from a staff perspective, we looked at it and said, well, what is an excessive use of city services when it comes to code administration, and at what point do these types of conditions become a chronic nuisance to the neighborhood? So I just wanted to provide some clarity on what staff's rationale was there and the types of conditions that we were talking about. If we turn to the memo that we put together for today, based upon the comments from the elected body, what we heard you say directly to us in the work session, what we heard indirectly in your responses to citizens last week, we identified essentially 3 decision points, and we outlined those in the memo. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to add one more point to what John was talking about. And he's going to go over some options, whether you remove the code mechanism, the tool completely, or whether you take some of the teeth out of it and unhook it from the certification. But as a partnership, going back to that partnership, we hold a CompStat meeting, which is a crime meeting every 2 weeks, and code enforcement has been sitting in that meeting, in that room with us, doors closed, solving the problems at the police department for the last 2 years. That is unique to any CompStat meeting I've ever heard of, to actually have a code enforcement person in there, in the room when we're talking about real crimes, real crime trends, because it's the same properties that we're going to, they're going to. And time and again, if we can't solve the problem, we'll send them down to help us out, or the fire department down to help us out. We talked earlier last year about some of the motorcycle problems we were having up in the north end, and it was a fire marshal and a code enforcement that finally brought resolution to that issue for the neighborhood. And as we send our police officers out this spring in the neighborhood policing program, this is one of the big tools that we use, which is code enforcement, to go pursue those properties that are the chronic nuisance properties in the neighborhoods that are attracting the crime. And those pictures right there are locations that would attract crime and just bring down a neighborhood. So it's absolutely a tool that the officers need, and we'll be using it, which is calling code enforcement and asking them to come out. And by adding more strength to their ability to ratchet up the fines, I think that it's a worthwhile tool to keep in the package. So that's what I would offer that as part of our neighborhoods policing program and part of our CompStat program. It only adds to what we're doing. So,
John, if I could, on those numbers you gave the mayor and council, just to clarify, when you run into a situation where there's a violation, it could be as a result of an inspector's observation.
Yes, sir.
Could be a result of a city elected official calling the office and saying, I've received a call on this property. That's a frequent way that those come to our attention, and rightfully so.
Yes, sir.
Or it could come from a neighbor saying, can you look at this property on this block or next door? So it
Yes,
comes to the office in different ways, all of them legitimate. But I just want to emphasize that on the question of are there repeat offenders, the answer is yes. And sometimes those,
I think we all get the emails from the same people who are
That's-
emailing about the same properties,
Right.
several times a year.
I think some of our council members have experienced that over and over again, where they're getting calls over the same property, over the same property owner, over and over again.
Oh, well, we have one we all know about. We all get the email from the gentleman on High Street.
So we tried to lay out the 3 decision points. And if we could take a look first at Chapter 197. And the decision point there is if the mayor and council want a property owner to lose their certification as a residential operator because of the types of conditions that we talked about a few moments ago on the code administration side. And if that answer is yes, then we wouldn't have edits to that section. If the answer is no, then that part could be removed.
So we're on 197. It's going to be
It's
page 6.
197.10.
It's the second
197.10.
to the last page.
So option A,
Yes, and option A is that we leave the language unchanged, but if a property owner or if a property is designated as a chronic nuisance from a code administration standpoint, which would be that they achieve those 3 violations in a 12-month period, then the certification as a residential operator could be lost. Or the mayor and council could say, well, no, we don't want someone to lose their certification as a residential operator, threatening all their operation of all their properties for those types of conditions. And we can amend that language to then restrict the loss of the certification to just the crime aspect of a chronic nuisance property. So it could be both, or it could just be the crime that would be cause for someone to lose their residential operator certification and their ability to run their rental properties.
One of the questions that I get is, okay, let's say I'm a property owner and I have 3 properties that I rent, and I have a rental license operator for all of them, and everything's up to date. And what if each property has 1 code violation? That's 3 calls on 3 of my properties. Do I still get, am I at that threshold, or is this property specific?
Chapter 95 is property specific. So the status of a chronic nuisance property is specific to a property.
For this though, for the certification,
Certification is across all properties. It's your ability to be designated as the designated agent to operate the properties. And that would be all their properties.
So in the case of, if I had 3 properties and each one had a code violation, it might be possible then to lose certification?
No, sir.
No.
Because it wouldn't be a chronic nuisance. It would take 3
Gotcha.
conditions at a specific property.
Okay. I just want to make sure that
Specific.
that's clear for everybody.
and John, just to clarify.
Unit.
You have, go ahead.
Not property, unit.
These are
In other
all,
words, let's say I'm a landlord, and I've got this building, and it's got 6 apartments in it. I would assume it applies specifically to the unit within that property.
well, not for the code administration stuff, sir,
You know, I'm not
because
even
on
talking
code
about that
administration, we're only talking about weeds, trash, and debris.
I'm just trying to further clarify your clarification of the mayor's understanding, that it's the unit.
For purposes, now we're on to the disturbance thing, qualifying calls instead of.
Yeah,
On the qualifying calls, is it understood that it would be the unit versus the building?
not for code administration,
Okay.
And then-
But for crime.
but for crime.
But for crime, okay.
Crime
that's-
stays the same.
Gotcha.
3 per unit, absolutely.
Right.
But you might have 2 units in one building, and then that building gets cited for code violation.
That's a different story.
That's per building, that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Back to, okay, we're all
So on
communicating.
decision point number 1, do we want to leave the code administration violations as part of the loss of certification? What's the consensus there?
I am at option B, and here are the reasons I'm at option B. As it relates to code administration, you apply those codes equitably for all properties within the city. Owner-occupied, rental, commercial, you name it.
Yes, sir.
And for me, there are two differences when you talk about revocation of the ability to rent properties within the city. And the first is the spirit, at least for me, of what I think my participation in this was to attempt to do, was to diminish the criminal activity from our community. That to me is top priority as this effort. The second is, unlike code enforcement of known violations as it applies to the property condition, when there are high weeds or there is, trash left, it doesn't matter whether it's a rental or owner occupied, you send a notice to that property owner. However, when criminal activity occurs at a property owner property, unlike an owner-occupied property where the person that owns and occupies that property is the person in which you are notifying that charge against, is there are larger instances on the rental side currently without this, where the property owner may have no awareness that their renter has participated in this criminal activity. So in order to preserve the spirit of that effort, that's the difference that I see, is this was a way to work cooperatively and in collaboration with the property owners that may have no awareness of criminal activity within the units, but clearly and differently on the code administration side are made aware every time a code violation exists. And that's, for me, the distinct difference I see and why my preference is option B, because I think it addresses the most largely unaware, heinous activities that we clearly are trying to diminish and deter from the city.
Would you, just since you're already speaking, Kristen, are you okay with leaving it in the chronic nuisance in Chapter 95? Code violations? So that we can still designate them chronic nuisances.
Do you want me to go through decision point 2 then, sir?
Well, let's
I'm
get
sorry,
I'm not there. I'm at one at a time. And
Yeah.
for me,
Okay.
let's
number
get a
one, that's
consensus
where I'm
on the
at.
first
Yeah.
decision.
And that's the
point.
reason I'm at that option.
Anyone else, A or B?
B.
B. Mr. Munson? A. Mr. Munson's A. Ms. Nye?
I would be A.
All right, we've got to wait for Marty to break the tie here, but
Mayor, just let me
sure,
say,
please.
there is no reason in the world why anybody should have to live in the kind of filth that you just showed us.
Right.
None whatsoever.
They don't.
And what happens essentially is, and I've heard this plenty of time, property owners, and not the good property owners, we know we have trash property owners. The property owners say, I'm not going to worry about that trash because if I leave it there long enough, the city's going to come and pick it up.
Yeah.
So it's not my problem. And,
Well,
when I
that's
go
who they
buy it-
call.
when
That's
I
who
go
they call
buy
to
it,
come pick it up.
when I go buy it, I'm going to call Bruce and I'm going to say, Bruce, you got to take care of this. I mean, I don't care who pays for it. Somebody's got to take care of it. These 2 mattresses have been laying here too long. So I think this has to be as stringent as possible.
Which when we do, we charge that property for that collection.
And we're still talking about putting fines in for repeat offenders.
The idea is you wouldn't lose
The idea
your
is you would not lose your license. And again, when we see a substantial percentage of these properties are owner occupied, it seems like we're treating landlords differently than we're treating owners. We're telling an owner, we'll fine you on the fourth offense. We're telling a landlord, we'll take away your right to earn a living on your fourth offense. And that's where I just see a difference. I don't.
But that's what bothers me, because the landlords, this is, yes, their living, and by that being their living, then by God, they should be maintaining even more so than a property owner. I'm sorry. We have to live up to the standards, but yet they don't. That's where I just have a...
But I don't agree. I think
well,
they do.
I do.
And I think we should impose
you know,
those standards. And with all due respect, I mean, I got to tell you, I think that somebody who lives in their home has a whole lot more responsibility to maintain it than somebody who's not living there. I mean, nobody...
But they're making a profit off of it, Lou.
And
my God, what has really turned this town around?
And I totally think that there should be significant penalties for violations. That's all. I just see a difference between Lawson's licensing and significant monetary penalties.
Well, then maybe we move on to the next decision point.
We'll find out what
because
Marty
I think
says.
part of it may.
The decision point 2 is found in the middle of Chapter 95. Actually, it's on the last page of Chapter 95. And that revolved around a discussion of whether or not, if code administration properties stay in the mix for a chronic nuisance property. And again, going back to Chapter 95 and its original purpose, Chapter 95 was designed to identify chronic nuisance properties and to levy a fee for the use of city services. It was not established as a crime-free standalone ordinance. And decision point 2 would be if a property is designated because of the code administration violations as a chronic nuisance, should that property be published on an annual list as a chronic nuisance property? I would say that we have seen in our research over the years, many communities do publish names of nuisance-type properties. Some cities put up big signs in front of property saying, this is who owns this, kind of a brought to you by. Some cities do that. We have not. Several years ago, probably 2 administrations ago, there was discussion about problem property of the month. And the police and code would come together and talk about a particular property. And that was discontinued after a period of time. So the experience that we see is some communities do it, some don't.
And this would be for people who own and occupy their own homes.
Correct.
Who have
it would be
more than 3 code violations in a year.
For specific types of violations,
Right.
Yes, sir. It would be for any properties, because Chapter 95 is not property specific.
Right.
So in any of those photos I showed you, if it was owner-occupied, rental, bank-owned, the question would be, would the mayor and council want those properties published in terms of ownership? This property's been declared a chronic nuisance, and here's the information we have on ownership of those properties.
John, just because there's been a lot of confusion, would you restate or clarify how you get to be a chronic nuisance property based on code violation?
Yes. You would have 3 separate and distinct violations of weeds, sanitation, nuisance abatement, and we have listed currently rubbish and garbage, but to simplify it, because there's crossover there, I would actually suggest we take section 307 out and limit it to the sanitation, the weeds, and nuisance abatement ordinances. But you would have to have 3 separate distinct violations like the ones I shown in the photos in a 12-month period. And that's regardless of whether or not someone had, in the period of time we gave them, went and cleaned it up.
Naming and shaming is highly effective. From the research that I've done and from what our urban partners have told us that has been done in other communities, It makes the public aware. I mean, this is public resources being used to address public health, safety, and welfare, and I think just compiling a list doesn't do any good if you don't publish it.
Well, I think for some of our owners, it's frankly academic. I think that the banks, who are largely anonymous, won't care, and I think that some of the landlords we have clearly identified as not having a significant interest in the health, safety, and welfare of our community won't care. That said, again, I hearken back to point one, which is the spirit of which I intended to enter into and participate in this process, and that is the crime that exists within our community. And for me, I look at this, again, differently. If a landlord or property owner is not going to address things like tall grass in a timely manner, or other types of code violations, and one of the hamstrings, I think, of this group here is we don't know what all's included in that code violation list at the moment. We simply don't. But for me, it's this. It is much different, again, for a rental property as it applies to criminal activity to publicize any such list to say, hey, if you're looking for a place to rent in this city, this isn't a good one, because they're on this list because they've got criminal activity in their rental unit, and this is probably not a good place for you to live. That, to me, I think speaks to the spirit of publicizing any such list to say, this isn't a real good place, you might want to go rent. There are tons of other good places out there within our city to do so. I don't think that list has anything to do with code violation related items, which again we can address equitably for all types of property across the board.
Just for clarity, this is a provision in Chapter 95.
Understand.
Which, if you're focusing just on the crime,
Which I have done.
it would be for owner-occupied properties as well.
I understand that, and that's why I made the very comments last week that I'm not sure that the direction to marry these within existing codes has worked out to meet the intended purpose and spirit in which I entered into participation in this discussion.
I understand, that we need to address crime, but it seems like a nuisance is a nuisance, whether it's related to criminal activity, which certainly, you can say in a scale rises to a little bit more of a priority.
Somebody having a tenant setting their trash out before 4 p.m. is significantly different than somebody having a tenant that is selling heroin.
And I'll tell you something.
And if you want to publish those people on the same list, I think that we are doing two completely different things by the ordinance changes we are about to create.
Typical situations that I know both is having a neighbor and doing a lot of domestic work. People's homes get foreclosed. They move out, they get divorced, they get remarried. Foreclosure proceeding takes a long time. And what happens is the home is empty.
The bank doesn't take deed ownership.
The bank does not take deed ownership, but the bank has equitable ownership. The former owner no longer lives there, and the bank does not maintain at all. Caused me to have at least 3 calls, and believe me, I would wait until the weeds got up to a foot tall before I would call. But there's a property owner, and this particular person is a police officer, who would have had her name published as a nuisance owner. When for all intents and purposes, she's not the owner. The bank's the owner. She doesn't live there. She doesn't reside there. She's given the property up. The bank owns it. The bank isn't maintaining it. But until that last aspect of a foreclosure proceeding gets done, the deed is not put in anybody else's name. So, and again, we talk about the percentage of foreclosed properties. And then I got to tell you, most of these people are being foreclosed upon, you know. Some of them may be investors that went south, but a whole lot of them are just good people who had the world get pulled out from under them. And I don't have any desire to see these people pick up the newspaper and then see that they're owners of nuisance properties in Hagerstown when they're citizens, they're living here. This particular person who I'm talking about is a neighbor, lives on the terrace. You know, got married, made a move, and for a whole lot of reasons that were no fault of her own, because a lot of the incentives that are given to professionals who you have to reside there for 5 years, can't rent it, has to be owner occupied, and there's a person who's getting married, and you know, and so I have a problem with publishing their names.
So on decision point 2, you're at B, option B.
I'm with Kristen.
I don't think it really matters to the people, honestly. So many of them have had so much from the city, they just more or less say, stick it and, you know.
So you're okay with, for
I just
the
don't-
list,
I just,
publishing only the criminal, the
The 97, is
Yeah.
that the code we're talking with? Yeah.
yeah.
okay. Mr. Munson, what do you think?
And I'm not a big.
I'll go with A.
And then decision point 3, does the elected body want to remove all code language from Chapter 95, or the proposed Chapter 95, which would designate certain properties as a chronic nuisance, properties that display the conditions like what we had shown in the photos, to say that those properties are not a chronic nuisance for this purpose, and have the fees assessed after the third occurrence in a 12-month period.
I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you saying that if we keep them as a chronic nuisance, the fees do get assessed after the fourth offense, or are you saying?
Well, if we remove all the language reference to code in Chapter 95, those properties that have 3 code violations, like what we're talking about, would not be classified as chronic nuisance and no fee applies. If we leave the language in, those properties could be classified then as a chronic nuisance and the fee would apply.
Just their names would not be published.
Their names would not be published.
And what we're talking about is the fees, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Their
I know.
operators certificate.
And they would not lose their operator certification.
Oh,
I think it's good.
I have no problem with that.
I think it's good too, because otherwise you just continue to
Yeah.
notify, remediate.
Well, you have the
And-
situation
Notify,
that was
remediate.
described to us on
Right.
Tuesday by the landlord on Hamilton Boulevard.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to solve, that problem. This at least would assist in it.
And can I just add, because I know that everybody thinks that I'm the real hard part of this, but, you know, I go out and I talk to the police officers without the chief knowing. And, you know, when I'm talking to police officers and they're involved in the day-to-day of criminal activity, and I said, okay, so, you know, what are your thoughts? And the bottom line is that for the most part, these places that are, those that are not kept up, those who do look like the pits, are the ones that you can almost guarantee, okay, that something's going to happen. Now, when the landlords were in here, and the cry was, we need more police on the street, well, they certainly are not listening to our police officers when the officers are saying, we need to do something here. And please, would somebody just listen to what we are saying? We are here trying to help this community. And this is what we see is wrong with the community. And again, everybody's crying, we need police, but here we are with legislation that, which way are we going to go? And I just wanted to throw that in, because you don't know. And I'd never give you names anyway.
It sounds like we have consensus then to leave code violations in for Chapter 95.
Let's look at A, just to be clear, A and B on decision point number 3. Are we saying A?
That the mayor and council may choose to define a property which has repeated code administration notices of violation as a chronic nuisance property.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which then could result in a fine or a
Well,
$100 fee.
They're fees for
on the
service.
fourth.
Excessive calls for service.
Yes, sir.
Right. For repeatedly having to go out to the same properties for the same kinds of conditions.
Yes, and for the purpose of trying to recover the cost for service.
Right.
And could I ask the question too, because I know that when we were first in office and there was somebody that was unhappy up in the West End, and I think it had to do with budget, and they had displayed this big sign and everything. And when you're talking about labeling and putting people's names in the newspaper or otherwise, I see too, as a community, as individual communities, that if in fact there is something that really is a problem, and if a landlord and the city cannot get something in, that I can also see a neighborhood saying, okay, you know, signs, we have a problem property here. Point the arrow, and I'm sure they'll take notice. And I don't think that's prohibited. I don't think that's against the law, is it? Is it? Okay? And certainly, we have a lot around that if it doesn't soon get addressed, that this in fact could happen.
If, just for staff's purposes, if we could kind of just recap and then talk about some of the secondary and tertiary tweaks that we're offering. For clarity, we would leave the code administration language in Chapter 95. However, when someone becomes a chronic nuisance property, their name would not be included on a published list.
Which
Based
for
on code
me
violation.
would only apply to the code administration side.
Right,
Yes.
that's all we're talking
Yes.
about. Right.
And then in Chapter 197, the status of a chronic nuisance property as a code administration chronic nuisance would not qualify for loss of certification as a residential operator. We also, based upon the discussions last week, made some other tweaks in the language, and we have to get with the city attorney to finalize this. Unfortunately, Mr. Boyer was not available tonight. But in Chapter 95, on the third page, under Notice of Nuisance, there seemed to be direction last week that whenever a qualifying call occurs, the police department would issue a notification. So those changes there all go back to that notification. There's some housekeeping type things in there. We did strike the word located in the city. We thought that was redundant. But in 95.3C, again, qualifying call has occurred or the property has been deemed a chronic nuisance. It gets back to the whole notice issue. And then we likewise had to adjust language in 95.3D where properties deemed a chronic nuisance shall have that designation for 1 year. It's just a housekeeping.
John, while you're there,
Yes, sir.
E, and somebody may point out that somewhere else it's defined
Okay.
appropriately. But if it's not somewhere else made clear, second line shall be imposed against the property for each HPD qualifying call. Again, I think we want to make it clear that the property means units, if it's a multi-unit dwelling.
Okay.
Okay, and it may
And-
be somewhere else made clear. I haven't had,
I think that's under the definition of
And it may
HPD
be,
qualifying call.
it
Which
may
is a
very well be.
separate item, right?
So those were the housekeeping type changes in Chapter 95. In 197, and Mr. Boyer did not weigh in on this language, that this was something that Mr. Zimmerman, the chief, and I, last
Thank
week,
you.
on page 2, under definitions,
Fantastic.
there seemed to be some concern over what a reasonable step would be. And Chief, if you
There
want to
was
cover that.
a lot of concern, not only from the folks, but I know I've talked to other council members. We all had that concern. I kept telling people eviction wasn't necessary, and then went home and thought, I keep telling people what's reasonable, but nowhere does the statute say what's reasonable.
Sure.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
what we came up to, and we'll take some input from council certainly, which is the language here. What we wanted to hit was that it's progressive, they're reasonable steps. We wanted to define what a reasonable step was, and then give an example of what a reasonable step would be. reasonable step could start something as small as a notice from a property owner to their tenant that there has been a qualifying call there and they need to stop it. A notice could be, it could include something as simple as a no trespass letter. And I would give an example, if you had a friend over at your house and that friend was the problem, then that friend gets the notice from the landlord, you're not welcome here, and gives them a letter of no trespass. And then if they come back on the property, they could be charged. It would also mean that that landlord might have to take action and follow through with that letter of no trespass. So the police might come, might find the person trespassing on the property, and then might need the they would need the landlord to appear in court to testify that, yes, they in fact did give them. So it engages the landlord with the police, and it sort of shows a progressive steps. Instead of just the vague language of reasonable, and what we didn't want to occur was notice number 5, notice number 6, notice number 7. We want some action and some progression. So to go from a notice to, and then exercising any legal rights that they may have, which would include eviction, but it doesn't have to go straight to eviction.
And I understand it's not easy to evict a tenant.
Absolutely.
And so if property owners, landlords are taking these reasonable steps, and I would think that would bolster their case if and when they ever had to go to court to evict somebody, that they have all this evidence that they've taken these reasonable steps to address whatever the issue is that's going on there.
And that was the big question mark, because with some of the landlords saying, well, you know, this is not doing anything for us. This is not helping us in court.
Well, and I think the answer to that is this, and I put a lot of thought into this also, on the eviction side of this. If you know, we're expecting, and I think everybody's got to acknowledge this, if we're expecting the landlords to evict somebody on the crime-free clause in the lease that's going to be mandated, I think that will only be upheld by the court under one of two circumstances. That is either a conviction or a PDJ, because you know and I know a PDJ can never occur without a guilty plea, and a guilty plea is an admission against interest, which can be used in the eviction proceeding. The other option that would be required, and I suspect, other than in very minor cases, the state's attorney and the police department may not be that happy, and that would be to require the police to come in and testify, because the landlord can't evict somebody because they had drugs in their apartment. And how do they know that? Well, they got a police report that said it. That's not admissible. And I think, depending on what the case is, I understand if we're talking about disorderly conduct, if we're talking about urination, nobody cares. But I know in felony cases, I would think the state's attorney would not want police officers testifying in a civil landlord-tenant proceeding before the criminal case goes to court. That would be my suspicion. So I think we've got to acknowledge that eviction under that particular clause probably wouldn't be a possibility until such time as we either have, but that fits in with your reasonable steps.
Right.
Because if the landlord's communicating with you about responding to you, and it is a disorderly or it is urinating, that's something that you guys can help them with and explain to them the fact of life is you can evict somebody for criminal activity without a conviction. You just need proof that the criminal activity occurred, and you would need that from somebody with firsthand knowledge, which would probably be the investigating police. Otherwise, after the conviction, you could do it.
Right, and because it's a civil proceeding, instead of marching in 6 or 7 police officers that handled each one of those calls, our crime prevention officer that runs this program, in this case Officer Kendall, could appear in court and testify on behalf of all the police actions and reports that were there and introduce those reports on behalf of that.
That's correct. He'd be
in a civil
custodian of
proceeding.
records. He'd be custodian of records, even in a criminal proceeding that comes into
Right.
the business records.
Yeah, I definitely see us appearing in some civil proceedings on Fridays and
that would
for
be fine.
eviction. And I think that's going to have to be our part in this, is stepping up and investing some time.
Good for you, Chief.
I look at even an hour's time for that officer in court is going to save us multiple return
Down the
calls
road.
for the police officers in the field, and it's going to be safer for them. They don't have to go back to that unsecured scene. So it's worth it. It's a good investment for us.
Absolutely.
Also, with the police department, to do a leg up here, is with the no trespass. Because if in fact the landlord says a no trespass, that has to then go to the police department showing that there is a no trespass on this person. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Because would it not put us behind if we do not have something that's at the police department?
Well,
Because
that's how the
I've
no
had-
trespass letters
Well,
go
yeah,
out.
because I know that, but I have people that put up no trespass signs and they don't realize. You got to send this up to the requesting that, okay, you know, we've got a no trespass. This is the point of having it because
Well,
the
if you
police
can
will
put up
tell
the
you.
sign,
The police will tell you, oh, there's nothing I can do. You never went to police headquarters with a no trespass sign.
Right, and that leads right into the next point, which is training. And that will be covered in training. And we have kind of bantered this around from about a week-long course to a coffee break. And what we put in here was a 4-hour, we were shooting for a half a day, 4 hours. It could be less, but I don't think it will be 1 hour training. This is going to be a couple hours of training, and we're just going to have to take it. But to put some clarification to it, we did add, and I'm not sure what page we're on here.
it's in there, it says four.
It says
on
4
page
hours.
4, It's 197.7.
Right.
And I think a lot would depend on the size of the class, how many questions people have. All those things impact how long a course is.
Right, and walking through an example like a no trespass letter and how we process that behind the scenes, how we get the information from the landlord, that's definitely points for training. So they know, where do I send a letter to? How do I serve the letter?
Oh,
All those
yeah,
kinds of
because,
things.
I mean, that's something that, you know, I see all these no trespass, and I have to tell these people, look, you want someone not on your property, that letter has got to go to police headquarters so they are aware of. Your
Yeah.
police officer coming here and you stating, I've got a no trespass sign, doesn't mean jack crap.
Right, what happens there is the police, gives the police the authority to remove somebody, but what we have to do is get their name.
Right.
And then share that with the property
Right.
owner, and then the property owner has to follow up with that letter. So that just fits right into that reasonable step example.
Yeah.
We were on your property, there was a disturbance, we removed this person because you had a sign up, but now it's your turn to send a letter to this person to follow up, to tell them they're not welcome to come back.
If a property owner does respond, and respond in what you believe is a very appropriate manner, but he still gets up to that third offense, is he still by definition a chronic property nuisance?
And eligible for the fines?
Well, now we're talking about
fees?
the loss, we get up into the potential loss of, this is now under the crime-free statute. So,
A property would be designated as a chronic nuisance, but if
they
we-
don't lose their license unless they take no reasonable steps.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, that's important to me. I want to say a couple things if I can. One, I want to commend you all, and I hope that the folks that spoke to us Tuesday understand that a lot of these changes have come about from their input. While some
Directly.
people indicated that we seem to be adversarial in nature, I really don't think we're nearly as adversarial as people think we are. And I think out of everything here, I really commend you in coming up with a definition of reasonable steps. Because it's really difficult to tell somebody that you have to take reasonable steps to solve a problem, and then don't say at all what is expected to be reasonable. The only other thing I would ask you all to take a look at, and it's been here for a while, and by practice it's fine. But since we're
Are we
doing
in
this
95
statute,
or-
we're in definitions.
Of
We're in the
95?
definitions in 95, under
Okay.
disturbance and qualifying call, okay? And as I say, I believe that in practice, you've done everything perfectly up until now, and I want to make sure that we get it in writing, and this is my example. You got a loud noise complaint, you got to the place and the officer doesn't see any evidence of loud noise. That's not a qualifying call, right?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay. And now, and I know that it has not been a qualifying call. I'd like us to try to get some language in the disturbance and qualifying call somewhere that indicates that it has been verified by the police. Because sometimes the people making loud noise complaints are really the problem, not the other people. Having been a tenant in an apartment, I can tell you, they said we were loud. And so I totally agree with it all. I just want to make sure that everybody understands what I know has been a matter of practice, that you don't get called out to a disorderly conduct call and find no evidence of disorderly conduct, but say it's a qualifying call. And I know
Understood,
you
sir.
have not done that, and I appreciate it.
So we want to make sure it's verified and confirmed by the police. on the
Right.
scene.
And I
Verification.
do commend you all for
Does
this.
verification count when the people that live in the other unit and they've called and they are on dispatch and are holding the phone and saying, "Are you listening to this?"
Problem
Okay.
is, how do you know
Well,
what
you know
dispatch
what,
is listening?
but
how do
see,
you know
that
what dispatch
opens
is
that-
listening to?
How do you know where they're at?
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
you've already given.
And
You've
they
already
could
given.
get sheets and
I
call
don't
about a
know.
place
I'm
on
just
Franklin.
saying,
they could
Kristen,
have,
I'm throwing it
they
out,
could
okay?
have their stereo on, and call. Yeah, I think the police have to absolutely.
It's like barking dogs.
It is, but that's.
There's also the mechanism of the court commissioners for private process, you know, so
Yeah.
if you can't,
Yeah.
if we can't catch it and it's
Look, I'm
happening to you,
asking
you
the
can always
questions
use the
because
court
I know that's what
commissioner.
I'm going to be asked.
Yeah.
Hey, people who rent, okay? So I call and this is what's going to happen now?
Well, it's the same thing as always been. The police are going to come out, and if it's loud, they're going to. It's a qualifying call. It's that simple.
Anyone else have any comments or questions?
I have a question. Do you have some understanding at this point where the council wants to go and what you'll be proposing as a result of this discussion next time?
Yes, sir.
I
Except
take
for
a shot
one.
Okay.
at summarizing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
decision point 1 is 2 to 2
Right.
right
So-
now.
yeah.
Let me just ask this
But
question.
let me just clarify, 2 and 3, the majority support B on 2,
Hold on,
removing it from the list.
hold on.
This is 95-4. Based on my notes, we've got 3 council members that preferred option B on 95-4,
Which is not putting them on the list.
not putting them on the list.
Right.
For nuisance calls.
And then on 95, the third decision point, which is 95-2, the majority prefer option A, which means the subsequent gray language stays in the ordinance.
If I could go back to 2, just so I understand clearly, while, again, I support option B, which I think is what the majority has indicated, that does not apply to a list that would be created as it applies to HPD
crime-free.
qualifying called chronic nuisance.
Right, they would
Right.
do
We're
that.
still going to publish that list.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we would need to come back at a work session. We could clarify the whole thing if you want to with Councilmember Brubaker, but at least for decision point 1, we'll need to bring that one back.
Okay, let me finish my question now. Assuming where we are, have we made any progress?
I think the council's made a lot of progress on this and brought out a lot of points, and you had a large group in here at our last session, and the discussion was good, and that's been included, and that's been discussed now. So I think we are down to that final draft, which we'll bring back to you,
Okay.
and give a council member a chance to weigh in on it.
Pieces of Oak Hill Avenue are going to hell in a handbasket. I get complaints from citizens there, even elected officials that were around there, about the needles in the alleys, about the condoms in the alleys, about the other disgusting stuff, the weeds. Does this give us any more power to remedy that situation?
If I could chime in there, Chief.
Or are we emasculating it based on these changes?
Overall, sir, from my perspective and from the community development perspective, from the code administration perspective, I think this is another tool. But it's not a tool that's going to erase all those types of problems that you're talking about. But it is another tool to hold property owners accountable, whether they're owner-occupied properties or rental properties. I think it's in terms of the training on the crime-free side, the required lease provision, to me, the underscoring purpose there is that we're asking people to be active in the management of their properties. And when people are active in the management of their properties, they're maintained better and crime goes down. So I think it's another tool, sir. And not to quote any particular council member, but there's a council member who told me once that, John, it's about finding balance, and sometimes if you can make everybody a little bit unhappy, we must be doing the right thing. And I think in this case, we hear from the neighborhood organizations, hey, we want this dealt with. We hear with the landlords, you're coming down too hard on us. We started off with an ordinance that's very different from where we started. But I think from a staff perspective, it's a balanced ordinance, and I think we can find that balance here. And so we'll work with the city attorney to create these changes.
I think the more significant impact is probably on the crime-free side.
Yes, sir.
Than the code enforcement. And so one question staff would probably raise for the council early on in November of 12, when you talked about your goals and priorities, code enforcement by a majority of you was a strong priority. We're still not quite clear what that means at this point. We've made some progress here because you're designating people with 3 or more code violations in 12 months as a chronic nuisance property, which then enables subsequent fines for a 4th or 5th violation. So that's a stronger enforcement action. But I don't know if we've gone as far as you wanted to go on code enforcement based on your early discussions about the status of code enforcement when you took office, the changes by the prior administration, and some of your goals and priorities for your 4 years. But I think that probably the biggest change here is on the crime-free side.
Well, in response to that, Bruce, one comment I would have is, I would entertain if staff thinks it would be a helpful tool. I don't know necessarily why you have to wait to find people until the 3rd offense. For instance, I think a $20 fine on the 1st offense is better than no fine. I mean, I agree with you when you say that you give somebody 7 days notice to clean it up, and if they clean it up, there's nothing we can do. And if they don't clean it up, it takes us 2 weeks to do it. I mean, I don't see why there isn't a minimal fine right from the beginning. And if it turns out that a 3rd or 4th offense fine needs to be raised, I don't have problems with that. I just didn't want to take somebody's livelihood from them. I have no problems with trying to get their attention in other ways.
Yeah, I'm familiar with many jurisdictions whereby the letter of notice goes out and they give 10 days or 14 days for corrective action to occur after receipt of the certified notification. After that date of expiration, beyond that notification of that's certified, each day is a qualifying offense. In other words,
that's another way to do it.
The impetus here is for the property owner to take corrective action in a timely manner. So if it's $25, it isn't $25 for an offense. Each day that violation occurs is an offense for that property. And therefore, if you want to wait 3 weeks to clean it up, then you pay $25 a day because you decide to wait 3 weeks to clean it up. You wait 2 days, it's $50. You wait 3 weeks, you're paying whatever 21 times 25 is.
In the same respect, what we're doing now is we're abating it, and we're not charging them anything but our actual cost, right?
Well, when we abate, we do issue a citation, and it's a $200 fine.
Okay.
And we do charge administrative processing fees.
Okay, good.
So of those 3,400 that Kathy had up on the screen, 500 and some we abate. Those ones, we are issuing the citations
But I'll bet you
and
the
charging the
vast
fees.
majority of what you're abating are foreclosed, bank-occupied, bank-owned.
It's a mix. Now, we have experienced more of the foreclosures since the housing bubble, but it is a mix.
It's hard to believe that there's a whole lot of owner-occupied people who are going to sit there and wait for the mowing people to come out and mow.
It's primarily on the abatements between the vacant foreclosed and rental properties. We have abated owner-occupied properties, but typically those are properties where hoarders
Right.
and people who have those difficulties And so, and we typically involve social service and stuff on those to try
So,
to work
but I
through.
think the bottom line is, Bruce, that I think this council is willing to put more arrows in the quiver if staff says we need more arrows. I don't think anybody is disagreeable to that. I
Okay.
just think that this was one arrow that we didn't think was appropriate to put in that quiver.
I mean, I threw out the other arrow before of these properties in which are returned to the banks, the owners foreclosed on. The bank determines it does not want the responsibility of maintaining the property, of paying the utility bills, and so it leaves the deed ownership in the property owner's name, who is no longer there.
Right.
And you allow the property owner who has been vacated to say, hey, give us notice within 30 days that you're no longer qualifying owner of the property, and therefore you wish to rescind your water and sewer allocation, and the bank would have to buy it back or else put the property in its deed ownership. So yeah, I'm willing to consider other arrows in
Yeah.
that quiver, and I think that that's one that addresses that. So
Right. Well, we just want to make sure that they know we're willing to work with them. That's
Okay, let me just make, I think Kristen and Lou makes a couple of very good points here. Are you all looking specifically at any change to city code to address Kristen's problem with bank issues?
We're exploring a number of things, sir, and we're looking at best practices to include, are there some different mechanisms that we could employ for the vacant foreclosed? I really think that clarity for staff on code administration is very important in terms of what direction you want staff to take, in terms of issuing fines and things of that nature. The posture we take right now is we work really hard to get voluntary compliance. That comes at a cost. And enforcement also comes at a cost, because that means then court time and things of that nature, and just with workload and finding that balance. So I would think that having a couple work sessions on what it is that we currently do, what it is that we would propose to do, and receive direction from the mayor and council on how you would like us to approach code administration throughout our neighborhoods.
just the last point on this, as it applies to Chapter 197 and the comments we heard at
Yes, sir.
our meeting the other evening, one that we haven't talked about, or at least haven't given it any additional consideration, is this training seminar, which we've added language to state that it's approximately 4 hours. But we certainly heard from a number of folks that said, hey, I'm a responsible landlord, and I take a week-long training. And so when I read the definitions section on 197.2E, and then I read the training 197.7, it specifically says city. And I would just throw out for consideration, so that we don't sort of pigeonhole ourselves into it for the longevity of this ordinance, if it would say under the definitions, a seminar sponsored by the city or other qualifying entity to provide information, just so we don't pigeonhole it, because at the end of the day, we may sit down and say, you know what, this organization provides a comparable, qualifying training process, and in some instances, maybe a more qualifying training process, and I wouldn't want to specifically exclude that for the landlords that take that constructive action.
I agree with Kristen. If we could, if for instance, our local landlord association wanted to be certified by HPD as being able to do this.
Train the trainer.
Right. So that's
I just think the way it's written right now, it kind of
have to be approved by the
pigeonholes
city.
us.
While you're on it, there was one point brought up that I didn't understand at all, and it may be because either it didn't make sense or.
The Housing Authority?
Housing Authority, but the Housing Authority was mentioned, but I think Housing Authority, from what I know, have much stricter standards than we've ever had. Is that right?
Yep.
But then Section 8 was mentioned. There's a huge difference between Housing Authority and Section 8. And does Section 8 have anything to do with what we're talking about at all?
Section 8's not exempt.
No, and I
It's,
mean.
Housing Authority.
And the Hagerstown Housing Authority, From what I can gather, and please tell me if we're different, if all the landlords in Hagerstown would be willing to have the same requirements that Hagerstown Housing Authority has, we'd probably be happy to have them do that instead of this whole program, right? To a
Their
certain
standards are
degree.
so high
Yeah.
that it's really something.
Well, I
this-
mean,
the
that's
types
the
of
point I'm
standards they have.
making. The standards they have are higher than the standards even that we're putting forth here, basically.
Well, in terms of their public housing units, I would say.
That's what I'm talking about.
I would say the ones the housing authority owns. The
Right.
housing authority, the city of Hagerstown, or Hagerstown Housing Authority runs a good operation.
Yes. But Section 8 is different.
That's a
from-
And-
totally different story.
And currently, the scope of inspection for non-Section 8 properties in the city, the scope of inspection is limited. So there are certain conditions where Section 8 would say, hey, you need to fix this.
The city wouldn't.
And the city says, well, no, that's okay.
Right.
And those conditions are some of the things that we would like to come back and talk to the mayor and council about.
That's fine. And you answered my question.
In general, doesn't the housing authority inspect all of Section 8 housing in the city once a year?
Yes, sir. The Section 8 inspectors conduct inspections.
But to be clear, on the police side, housing authority and public housing units is much more strict than what we are here.
Right,
Yes.
they have a whole piece that this legislation doesn't even have, which is screening up front. They screen out for certain types of offenses, crimes, that this doesn't even involve. So,
And the amazing thing with the housing authority and setting there, and I know because I was very skeptical, and it was a matter of, okay, bringing them on board because there was problems with Nolan, and I'll tell you, what they've done now, as soon as they find out, they may even see, and I mean, that person or persons is out of there.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
only thing that we don't have when it comes to Section 8 is the fact that we don't have housing as far as part of security. We are the ones that still have to do that part, so that's us.
right, and I can go back, and I want to add just, if I may, Mr. Mayor, one quick thing. First of all, I mentioned that CompStat meeting, that crime meeting that we have, and code enforcement sitting at the table. There's one other civilian partner that sits at that table, and that's Rhonda Will from the Housing
And
Authority.
she's terrific.
She actually sits in that meeting
Yep.
and totally trusted partner with us.
Yes.
And just as active a manager as you can imagine.
Yeah.
That what they do and how responsive they are is great. Their security force is great.
Yeah.
To work with and work with the police. So we share a lot with them, a lot of information with them. And to answer Councilman Munson's question, does this work for us? Yes, it works. Over and over again, and one of the ladies mentioned that spoke last week that she calls, we were told by, Captain Holtzman at that time to call the police on the problem property. But at that point, the threshold was all the way up to 10. I needed to get 10 before we could take any real action. So does this ordinance work? Yes. By lowering it down to 3,
Numbers.
I can go back to my same mantra at my community meetings and saying, please call the police. There will be action taken on the other side. And I've explained, she was very well versed on this, as a lot of people are that I've spoke about this. Excessive calls for police ordinance, or police services at that time, the same chapter 95. Please call the police. We can eventually use this, and I will send out warning letters. I think this is going to add a whole new dimension to what we're doing out there, and so you'll be hearing more of that from me. Please call when there's a problem. The police will come out. We'll go back over some retraining again with the officers, exactly how the program has been strengthened.
It's the qualifying calls, Mark,
And the importance of
because,
the qualifying call.
I mean, there's calls at an apartment complex that is over 100, and how many of them are really qualifying calls as to what you would say is qualifying. And that, too, is what the public needs to know. What is a qualifying call? And again, it has to be spelled out.
Sure.
Because
And
a lot of
the
people
councilman
don't.
mentioned the needles and the condoms, you have drug use, prostitution use, things like that. That's exactly an example, I would say. Please call the police
Yeah.
when you see that suspicious person back there. We go back there, and we might not catch them in the act of committing one of those things, but they would fall under the suspicious person. Again, a qualifying call. They don't belong on the property, they're there. So we're notifying the landlord at that time that somebody, the property owner, that somebody's using that back of that property for that reason, and then work with them, improve the lighting, maybe put a fence up,
Right.
and stop the activity back there. So
Yeah.
it's another good example of how it can be used.
Well, before you guys run, today I had to call Vicki in your department to report 2 violations. I had to, I talked about Kathy, you probably heard that one, but I didn't want to pile on Kathy, so you're it.
Yes, sir.
When you turn from Franklin Street right across from the post office parking lot into an alley there, I can't remember the name of the alley, there's a green building on the left. At this point, there is a big wire coming from someplace, I don't know where, that hangs beside that building. It could be dangerous, it may not be dangerous, I don't know. But if you go on, there's a 4-way stop. If you go left, then you go into the parking deck. But there's a door there that says, I think it says 78 or 87 Wareham Place. And there have been 2 bags of trash laying there ever since I've been in office. The bags have broken open now. They were plastic, and they still are plastic, but they've broken open, and the trash is exposed. And apparently they blow around, the stuff blows around quite a bit when the wind blows. If you all could take a look at that and
I'll pass
remedy that situation.
I'll make sure that Vicki follows up, sir, or the staff follow up.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on this? It looks good work by all, and
Good job.
it's been a deliberative process, but I think in the end, we're going to have a better product and hopefully give staff more tools.
Bring it back next week?
Yes, and we'll work with Mr. Boyer to incorporate the direction we received from the mayor and council tonight. And the one question for next week would be decision point 1.
Correct,
Well-
with Brubaker back.
Yes.
And one final comment. I'm sorry I'm talking too much, but I think this needs to be said. The newspaper did an editorial today, of which I'm sure everybody in the room has read.
I didn't read it.
No, I
It's
didn't
a
read
great,
it.
it was a great editorial.
I was told it was very good.
It was extraordinary. It was one of the best editorials the newspaper's ever done in support of this program. And I just want to make the point that there were a lot of landlords in here last time for the hearing. And my guess is, with the exception of 1 or 2, that none of those landlords would ever have a violation. They were mostly extraordinarily good people. And they were upset because of the bureaucracy being pushed on them, I guess. And I think it goes without saying that it's those kinds of people who are always hurt by the passage of crime control legislation, unfortunately. If they were the only kinds of landlords, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this tonight. But unfortunately, there are so many more who represent a different view of the responsibilities of landlords in taking care of the kinds of issues that we're talking about. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for the direction, and we'll be back next week.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. City administrators' comments.
None from me this evening.
All right, we'll turn to the council. I'll start to my left here, Mr. Munson.
I'd like to thank the city employees for once again stepping up and taking the responsibility to help deal with the terrible weather we've had. Apparently, they're going to get the opportunity to step up one more time tomorrow and perhaps over the weekend. And I know that they've been spending a lot of time keeping us safe and cleaning the city up of snow and ice. And I commend and thank them for that.
Mr. Elshire.
As someone who works for a municipality and has been out on several water line breaks, I would say ditto to Don's comment. And speaking of the Herald, I have been attempting to get on my digital, this is just a funny side story, to try and get the digital online subscription, and for some reason it won't take it. Maybe they just completely barred me. But so I called in, I tried to connect, and they connected me with somebody else that was trying to connect. And it happened to be Ron Bauer, so I haven't called back in. So, literally, it was Ron Bauer. I was like, great, we're the only two that call the paper anymore. But What I would add to Don about the weather is, we're talking about rentals and owner-occupied and all kinds of folks that live in the city. With the weather that is about us, we certainly have, elderly and other folks around us, and just be mindful of your neighbors and try and, assist them with cleaning up and making sure that, things are okay. The other two items that I have is State of the County. I attended that this morning along with the mayor and Penny, and it was enjoyable. The last item is the Coalition Day in Annapolis that we did. Anytime you sit at Paul Muldowney's table, it's enjoyable for breakfast. So, but last week, just a couple of things on the Coalition Day in Annapolis. One is, it was good to talk to Delegate Donahue about a piece of legislation that largely this body really doesn't know a whole lot about, that's apparently being written sort of on our behalf, and so, I'm not real sure that the blighted property legislation, that is going to go in its speed in the direction that I think, parties had envisioned, and frankly, it's because I'm not certain, we fully understand what the parameters of being asked are, because we frankly haven't been largely included in that discussion.
No, and weren't they concerned too because they thought that maybe we also had our own legislation with blighted that nobody has determined what we have?
Yeah. The second was the coalition has certainly gotten better at two things over the years, and the one is getting us to the various parties that we need to go to for our strengths and weaknesses. And I think that was exemplified. I met with Barbara Frush, who was actually related to a former mayor of the city, which we didn't know, or I didn't know until the time. But she certainly heard the message when, some of us at the city level were able to speak, competently about our desires for demolition of MELP. And so, not only do you get in front of these people, but I think that the coalition has done a much better job of getting the right folks in front of the right, people for those conversations to make it stick, so to speak. And so I think that was good. And the other is they've certainly got better at sort of the promoting Washington County in that more informal evening atmosphere, which is bringing more people in to say, hey, we're part of Maryland. It doesn't stop at the Frederick County line. So I would give kudos to the coalition for, those two parts of that effort.
Mr. Metzner.
Obviously, what both council members said about staff are very appropriate, and I want to thank them also. They've done a superb job, and it looks like they're going to have a lot more work to cut out for them soon. I thank staff for making me look like I actually have some kind of power around here. Every time I walk in the courthouse now, I have sheriff's deputies thanking me for all the salt that's in the alleys, and the problem they were identifying, the city has totally solved. And every time I walk in, they make sure I know that they've done a nice job. The last thing I will say is I just mentioned it for food for future discussions. And when I say future discussions, I mean after this winter. A lot of times we get emails or letters from people, and sometimes they think they're good, and sometimes we don't. And sometimes we look at them and throw them out and then have second thoughts. And I'm talking about the one from Kurt Cushwall, who my initial reaction was right. But the more I thought about it, and what that was an email saying, you talk about trying to do things for downtown and getting people downtown, and one of the first things that people ask landlords about when they rent downtown is who has snow removal responsibility. And having rented from Mr. Cushwall for probably 20 years, I know who had snow removal responsibility, and it was the tenant, I can assure you. And so what his recommendation was that we consider having the city responsible for downtown sidewalks for whatever, whether it's a block out from the square, whatever, is we all come downtown, and for me, I walk by Manny Shayle's place and it's nice and clean, and then I walk by Mr. Bryan's place at 82 and it's nice and clean. And then I walk up to the Hamilton Hotel corner when, surprise, surprise, nobody's even trying to clean it. which is a major corner of an intersection. And there's a number of properties throughout our downtown that are like that. And then I understand what we do. We eventually, you know, abate it, but in the weather we've had, it's really not suitable to abatement now that it's all frozen solid. And we do have equipment that is a lot easier than somebody shoveling. And the other thing, believe me, having lived through some big snowstorms, is the only place you can shovel snow from the sidewalks into the street. I mean, there's no place else to put it. It's not like my yard. It goes right in the street. And that's not too bad with the 2-inch snowfalls. But believe me, when we had 10 and 15-inch snowfalls, so, and I know that nothing's free. You know, you can't take on the responsibilities of cleaning these sidewalks and acting like it doesn't cost the city money. But I think it is something that would be good for the thought process for both our downtown business owners and, just as importantly, our residents, who, again, you know, yeah, we can abate, but that doesn't really solve the problem, and you have a lot of people that need to walk downtown. And in that particular corner is in, you know, a corner where people walk in the court. I hope everybody's careful tomorrow, and I hope the responsible governments like courts close down if in fact we get what they're calling for. I see constantly in our court system, Allegheny, Garrett, and Frederick County are closed, and I look and go, and we in government need to understand that when you're trying to ask citizens not to get on the roads, that it's government's responsibility to be the first one in the lead. And so I hope everyone's safe.
It's judicial rigor. Ms. Nye.
I know that Pittsburgh has brought this to light, and that's the heroin use and the amount of deaths that has been associated with, and it has been significant. And then last night I was listening because I thought, oh, okay, we're going to be on the news, knowing that yes, we do have a problem, and it in fact was Frederick. Yeah. And Frederick then also came on with the drug now that is being used, that what they're advising is that, you know what, if you're a heroin user, at least please be aware of that there's something out there. We as the city of Hagerstown have not gone forward with anything, nor has Washington County. And I believe that the citizens need to realize that we also have got a problem here. I know that the chief had said, you know, we need to get something out, and I think that we need to do it sooner than later. I still haven't been able to get to my contact at the health department because the phones have been really nuts, and I think that they should know exactly too, and I need input from them as to what is going on.
Can I give you some?
What?
Some input?
Yeah, go ahead.
And I speak of this of being on the Washington County Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee that consists of all the judges, prosecutors, public defender, health department, parole and probation. First of all, as the chief would confirm, unfortunately, we have an epidemic. We're averaging an overdose a week in this community. This community, as well as many others. What's an important thing to understand is that the health department has now just obtained a grant. Chief, do you remember the name of the drug, the one that saves people's lives? It's Narcan. The drug that they're getting isn't actually Narcan. Narcan, I think, is an injectable. They have one now I think you can squeeze up the nose, and I forget the name of it. Yeah. But they have received a grant now. Unfortunately, it's a horrible addiction, and a lot of families know that their children are addicted and are trying to do something about it. One thing they can do immediately is contact the health department, and they can obtain for free a prescription for this drug with a very minimal amount of training on how to use it. It is a drug that if someone were to overdose on heroin, if it gets to them quickly, it absolutely stops the effect and saves lives immediately. So that's one penny. Yeah. The other thing that is very important to know in our community that has almost zero funding by the county commissioners for mental health treatment, is one of the only counties in the entire state that gets like no funding. But in our county, there is zero weight for mental health and there is zero weight for addictions. If you call the Washington County Health Department today and you want addiction help or you want mental health assistance, you will be there today. And you will be there today not to make an appointment,
Right.
but to start treatment. And so that is
Yeah.
the update. The health department is extremely aware of it and is doing everything in their power, but we are not getting the word out. You
No,
are
we're not
right.
getting the word out because we have had deaths associated with it in the city. And we've had many more in the county. And this has been from the beginning of December. And that's why it's very important. Kristen and I both discussed it, as well as Lou, last Monday with the chief. And it's something that really does need to be put out. And also, just to give you 47 years ago as to how things have changed. Being married, I'm expecting a baby. We're going to find a place to rent. My husband is in the service, out of the service. We're in the north end of town. We go up to an apartment, and the person there said, "Oh no, we can't rent to you. You're a young couple, and you're expecting a baby." And how we've come from that to now crime-free housing. 47 years. That's all.
Well, thank you. I would like to echo a lot of the comments I heard, especially thanking staff for all their hard work and dedication, especially with this weather. An example is the work that's been done on this ordinance that's been before us for about 2 months now, over 2 months, 3 months even. The information on heroin, I agree, is just, it takes tragedies like losing a celebrity to focus everybody's attention sometimes, but it is an ongoing problem, and I do know that it's nice to know what resources are out there, so I appreciate that. I also like to echo the sentiment about going to Annapolis. It's nice to spend a day with Councilmember Brubaker and Councilmember Alshire, and especially our 4-hour ride home from Annapolis since we got caught behind an accident. But we had some good discussion, and it's always an honor and a privilege to represent Hagerstown in Annapolis. I'm going to be going tomorrow evening to a reception or a dinner with some legislators with Board of Ed member Donna Brightman, and then on Thursday, the Maryland Mayors Association is being received by the governor, so hopefully I'll get to chat with him about everything that's going on in Hagerstown. So I'm looking forward to that. Trying to think, we had a great celebration anniversary today for SCORE. The comptroller was in town to celebrate the Plum being in business for 30 years, and he made some statements to the effect that small business truly is the backbone of the Maryland economy and certainly the American economy, and we celebrate what SCORE does in the community with their free counseling for small businesses. And with that, unless anyone has anything else.
I don't know if anybody checked their email. There's
Oh,
like
I know.
30 emails from the English, the official language. Anyway, anyway, I don't know where it came from or what it's originating from, but I don't have any huge interest
No.
in stating the obvious through some
Right.
formal process.
I guess everybody's been receiving emails, and what I've been told is it's in response to the Super Bowl Coca-Cola commercial where people sang "America the Beautiful" in Spanish, and they proposed that we have some English-only ordinance, and most of the folks emailing don't even live in Hagerstown or Washington County. And my response to the first email was that we don't really have an issue with that here, so we're not really interested, like Councilmember Alshire said. Right. But yeah, and then I got more and more emails, so I decided to stop responding to those. But yeah, there's none of those ordinances coming down the pike here anytime soon. All right. Yeah, right. Okay, well, with that, we'll be adjourned. Thanks, everybody.